When God has a plan is the default answer. Imagine a world where almost every hard question ends with the same sentence. God has a plan. A child dies. God has a plan. A war destroys a city. God has a plan. A good person loses everything. God has a plan. Now imagine a woman who lives inside that world, hears that sentence again and again, and quietly thinks, what if there is no plan? She does not shout. She does not start a revolution. She does not build a new religion. She simply refuses to call suffering a blessing. That woman is real. Her name is Louise Victorine Ackermann, a French poet, born in 1813, died in 1890, almost erased from popular memory. But if you care about the tension between truth and comfort, her life is like a hidden key. Section 1. Born into faith, trained into doubt. Louise Victorine Ackermann, later known as Louise Victorine Ackermann, is born on the 30th of November 1813. In Paris, she spends much of her childhood near Montdidier, in northern France. The France she is born into is marked by Catholic tradition. Religious belief is not just a private choice. It is part of identity, family, and social respectability. But inside her home, something unusual is happening. Her father is not a conventional believer. He is a Voltairean free thinker, an atheist in the Enlightenment sense, influenced by the French encyclopedists. He does something rare for his time. He personally directs his daughter's early education. He does not simply teach her to repeat prayers. He teaches her to read, to think, to argue. He introduces her to the philosophy of the encyclopedists, writers who trust reason, who question authority, who criticize superstition. So while many children are taught that obedience is the highest virtue, Louise is quietly taught that understanding matters more than submission. While many are told never to doubt what the priest says, she is shown that doubt can be a form of honesty. In 1829, she is sent to school in Paris. The city that once shook Europe with revolution now becomes another layer of her education. She is a young woman, moving between rural quiet and urban intensity, carrying inside her a mind trained to ask, why? Section 2. Berlin. Languages, ideas, and a short happiness. In 1838, her world widens again. She travels to Berlin, a major intellectual center of the time. There she studies German, and goes further. She studies Sanskrit and Chinese. For a 19th-century French woman, this is extraordinary. She is not being prepared only for domestic life. She is entering the world of philology, of comparative language, of ideas that stretch across cultures and centuries. In Berlin, she meets Paul Ackermann, an Alsatian philologist. They marry in 1843. For a little more than 2 years, her life has a rare balance: love, companionship, shared intellectual curiosity. Then, without warning, it ends. Paul dies. The universe does not explain itself. The pain does not come with a clear reason. This early widowhood, this sudden break, will later echo through her philosophical poems. It is one thing to talk about suffering in theory. It is another to have it tear your life in half. Section 3. Nice. Withdrawal, silence, and the first layers of writing. After her husband's death, Louise leaves Berlin. She goes to Nice, in the south of France, to live with a favorite sister. Nice is a place of light, sea, and gentle climate, but no landscape, however beautiful, can cancel grief. In this relative seclusion, far from the centers of Parisian culture, she begins to live with two constant presences: memory and suffering. Out of this quiet, her writing grows. In 1855, she publishes Contes en vers, Tales in Verse. In 1862, she publishes Contes et Poésies, Tales and Poems. These early works are described as simple, charming, almost classical in their restraint. They show control, taste, and technical skill, but they are still a surface. They are like a polite mask, worn over a face that has seen too much. Section 4. The mask falls. Philosophical poems. The turning point comes in 1874. She publishes a volume with a long title, Poésies, Premières Poésies, Poésies philosophiques. First poems, philosophical poems. It is in the Poesies Philosophiques, the philosophical poems, that her true voice appears. These are not devotional verses. They are not hymns to divine goodness. They are not moralistic sermons. They are something much more unsettling. Critics of her time describe these poems as somber and powerful. They say she expresses her revolt against human suffering. Revolt against human suffering, not acceptance, not justification, not a pious reinterpretation. Revolt, even before the full volume appears. Her work is noticed. In May 1871, the influential journal, Revue des Deux Mondes, publishes a review by Elmi Marie Caro. He speaks of the impiété désespérée, the desperate impiety, of her verses. He criticizes her lack of religious consolation, but he also praises the vigor of her thought, and the excellence of her poetic form. This is important. It means her poetry is strong enough that even those who disagree with her worldview cannot dismiss her as shallow. Her desperate impiety is not cheap rebellion. It is the voice of someone who has looked at suffering and refuses to cover it with easy religious phrases. Section 5. What does revolt against human suffering really mean? Louise Victorine Ackermann does not write a philosophical system. She does not give you numbered theses or a formal doctrine. She writes poetry, but if you listen carefully, a clear attitude emerges. First, she refuses to treat suffering as a simple test from a benevolent God. She has seen death. She has seen loss. She has seen the indifference of events. She does not find it honest to call every tragedy a hidden blessing. Second, she does not accept that there is a visible moral order built into the universe. The good are not always rewarded. The cruel are not always punished. Children die, the innocent suffer, and no obvious cosmic balance appears. Third, she does not pretend to know what no one knows. She does not claim to have discovered a secret plan behind all events. Instead, she stands in a more fragile but more honest place. She says, in effect, we suffer. We know we suffer. We do not know why. And no story, no dogma, no doctrine has the right to erase that fact. Section 6. Her position on the map of philosophy. If you try to place her on the map of ideas, she stands at the intersection of three major currents. 1. Enlightenment free thought. From her father, and from the encyclopedists, she inherits a respect for reason, a suspicion of religious authority, and a willingness to question sacred claims. 2. 19th century philosophical pessimism. In the wider European context, thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer are arguing that life is filled with suffering, that desire leads to frustration, that the world is not designed for human happiness. Louise's poems resonate with this mood. She does not copy their systems, but she shares their sense that suffering is central, not accidental. 3. A sober, non-theistic seriousness about human life. She does not build a cheerful humanism that says, everything will be fine if we just believe in progress. She builds something more austere, a view in which human beings are fragile. The universe may be indifferent, and yet, our choices still matter. She does not say, nothing has meaning. She says, if there is meaning, we will not find it by lying to ourselves. Section 7. Religion, consolation, and its price. Louise's work is not a simple attack on believers. It is a confrontation with the way religion is often used. She sees that religion can function as a consolation machine. It tells people that their pain is part of a plan, that their losses will be repaid, that every injustice will be corrected. In another world, she understands why these ideas are attractive. Fear of death is real. Fear of the unknown is real. Fear of meaninglessness is real. But she also sees the danger. If every wound is immediately wrapped in a religious explanation, we may stop looking at the wound itself. If every tragedy is instantly called a test, we may stop asking why such tragedies exist at all. If every injustice is postponed to a future judgment, we may stop fighting injustice here and now. In this sense, religious dogma can become a cage made of beautiful sentences, a cage made of sacred stories, a cage that feels safe, but keeps the mind from facing reality. Her desperate impiety is not a love of darkness. It is a refusal to use light that is not real. Section 8. Morality without guaranteed heaven. If there is no guaranteed divine plan, no automatic cosmic justice, then a hard question appears. Where does morality come from? Louise does not write a formal ethical treatise, but her stance suggests a clear direction. Morality cannot depend on the promise of reward or the threat of punishment. In another world, if it did, then goodness would be a transaction, not a value. Instead, morality must grow from the shared human condition. We all suffer, we all fear, we all lose, we all know what it means to be vulnerable. From this shared fragility comes a simple insight: if the universe does not guarantee justice, then the only justice that exists is the justice we try to create. If there is no automatic meaning, then the only meaning that exists is the meaning we build in our relationships, our actions, our honesty. Helping someone in pain is not just earning points for heaven. It is the only real answer we can give to the darkness of suffering. Section 9. Thoughts of a Recluse and the Shape of Her Later Life. After the publication and reception of her philosophical poems, Louise returns to Paris for a time. She gathers a circle of friends, but she does not become a public celebrity. Her temperament remains reserved. Her life remains relatively quiet. In the 1880s, she publishes Pensées d'une solitaire, Thoughts of a Recluse. This work includes reflections and a short autobiographical sketch. The title itself, Thoughts of a Recluse, captures her position. She is not a preacher. She is not a politician. She is not a public agitator. She is a thinker who has stepped slightly aside from the mainstream of society to look at it more clearly. On the 2nd of August 1890, in Nice, Louise Victorine Ackermann dies. No thunder, no scandal, no grand final scene, just the quiet end of a life that had looked at suffering without flinching. Section 10. A woman out of place and ahead of her time. To see how unusual she is, you have to remember her context. She is a 19th century French woman in a society where religion is woven into identity, where women are often expected to be guardians of piety and transmitters of faith. Yet she is educated by a Voltairean atheist father in the philosophy of the encyclopedists. She studies German, Sanskrit, Chinese. In Berlin, she writes poetry that critics describe as a revolt against human suffering and as desperate impiety. She does not offer the sweet religious consolation that many expected from a woman poet. Instead, she offers something harder, and in a way, more respectful of the reader's intelligence. She offers honesty. In this sense, she anticipates themes that will later appear in existentialist and post-religious thought. The refusal to hide behind metaphysical guarantees. The insistence on facing absurdity and suffering directly. The idea that meaning, if it exists, must be created, not received ready-made. Section 11. Why her voice still matters. Today, Louise Victorine Ackermann is not a widely known name. She is not quoted on motivational posters. She is not turned into a brand. But if you listen to her carefully, she speaks directly to a tension that still defines our time. We still live between two strong desires: the desire for comfort and the desire for truth. We still hear voices that say, "Do not question, just believe, everything is for the best." And we still feel, in hospitals, in wars, in accidents, in private grief, that sometimes things are not for the best. Louise's life and work offer no magical solution, but they offer an example. The example of a person who chose to keep her eyes open, to acknowledge suffering, to reject dishonest consolation, to search for dignity, not in a promised paradise, but in the way we face reality, here and now. Her story invites us to ask ourselves, when we suffer, what do we really want? A soft story that keeps us calm, or a clear view that may hurt, but respects our intelligence? Closing. Her quiet, sharp legacy. Louise Victorine Ackermann was born in a religious century, raised by a free-thinking father, educated in languages and ideas, Married to a scholar, widowed too soon, and transformed by grief, she withdrew from the noise. And in that quiet, she wrote poems that critics called a revolt against human suffering. She refused to call pain a gift. She refused to call injustice a test. She refused to pretend that the universe is kinder than it is. In doing so, she did something rare. She showed that a human mind can stand without the crutch of illusion, not without fear, not without sadness, but with a kind of fierce honesty. Her name may not be famous, but her stance is powerful. It lives in every person who dares to say, I will not pretend to know what no one knows. I will not decorate suffering with lies. I will try to live without closing my eyes. This is the quiet, sharp, enduring legacy of Louise Victorine Ackermann, a woman who chose truth over comfort and turned her refusal to lie into a philosophy written in verse and sealed in a life lived with open eyes.